Welcome back. Happy New Year. And I hope everybody enjoyed their holidays.
I know I did. I know we did.
Yeah, y'all were traveling.
Yeah, other than the traveling part, it was great.
Mine was relaxing and quiet.
Because we were not there.
Because you were not there.
Otherwise, it would not have been relaxing or quiet.
It was relaxing, just not quiet.
Not quiet at all.
So we're starting back in chapter 13 of Corinthians, 1 Corinthians. So we are in the love chapter.
Yes.
What's love got to do?
I did say that we're going to say love, and it's going to be like numerous references to any song that had love in it.
It's got everything to do with it. That's got everything to do with it. So
I just predicted that.
So Paul talks in 13 here about the greatest of all virtues, and that being love, and it's the supremacy of love.
And keep in mind, this is in light of chapter 12, where it really was talking about the gifts and things like that. And I think a lot of people read that chapter and start focusing on what is my gifting, what is my purpose, what am I supposed to do, and what is my super spiritual power and all that. And they completely forget that this chapter follows it.
But this chapter is used by the world a lot in weddings. Of course, we know it. Every wedding says chapter 13.
I know. I went to a wedding last week, and the guy who was doing the thing was reading through it too.
He totally missed the opportunity.
Totally missed the opportunity.
That guy.
He was handsome,
what you get,
though.
buddy. That's what you get, buddy. You hire the cheapest. You get the best.
They had him running around making sweet tea, too.
Oh, they had, good. They got their money's worth on you.
Got their money's
That's good.
They got their money's worth.
So, but 13 it's a beautiful, powerful reflection on that, the nature of that agape love, which is that unconditional, selfless love that is the foundation of the Christian life. You know, that's the biggest thing we got to understand here, and this is what Paul is bringing to light.
And if anything, this chapter really does define what that love looks like, because I think we use that word so frequently, so often, and we don't really, understand how that works, because look at how people treat each other in their houses and say, I love you, or this is the one I love. And then we're going to go through these various different things that are mentioned, and at the end of the night, it's really a time to sit back and say, how do I exhibit those in the spaces that I'm at?
Yeah. That love and that feeling it's an active force, right? We got to understand that love is very active, and it transforms relationships, it transforms attitudes, it transforms behavior, right? So we got to think about it. And then the context of what Paul's talking here, it serves as a rebuke to the Corinthians, who were prone to boast about their spiritual gifts. Because remember, we're coming from 12, right? And we're talking about the spiritual gifts there, and it gauged that competitiveness and diverse behaviors amongst the congregation.
And remember, whenever we were in the first couple of chapters, and he was addressing them and talking to them and trying to correct them, a lot of those corrections, a lot of those addresses were specific to the divisions within the church, and divisions not only amongst different teachers, because that was part of the problem. The other part was socioeconomical differences between people that could drag you into and sue you, and people who were just going in and eating whatever they could and neglecting the poor, the widow, and anybody else. You saw these things kind of running rampant enough to where someone who's not there is catching wind and needs to address it.
Yeah, exactly. So in spiritual gifts are very important to understand and what they are, but without love, they lose their true value. They're nothing.
Well, actually, they're completely meaningless.
Yep. And love is not only greater than all gifts, but it's also eternal. Eternal. We're going to dive into that, and we'll show you that. Outlasting gifts like prophecy, knowledge, and tongues, and with the eventually will all stop and cease. Because remember that whatever those gifts that everybody likes to focus on, they're not going to go with us.
I will also add that cessationists, people who believe that the Holy Spirit decided that after the Bible was canonized and completed, just kicked up his feet and sat back and let everything go. They love that section where it says that all of these things will end, because they assume that they've all ended. And hey, we've seen enough to know that those things haven't. That's talking about the end of the age, not now.
Yep. So our key themes in 13 is the necessity of love, the characteristics of love, and the supremacy of love. So why does it matter? It teaches that love is the defining characteristic of a Christian life. Spiritual gifts are valuable, but they lose their power and significance without love. And in Paul's words, challenge believers to prioritize love over performance, status, and ability, reminding us that true spirituality is measured by our capacity to love others as Christ loved us. So our takeaway for this chapter is going to be that the message that love is not optional for Christians. It's not optional, it's essential. And as we study this chapter, we need to reflect on the practice, how we can practice selfless, sacrificial love in our daily lives, both within the church and in the world.
Yeah, and we're also going to, whenever we start really looking at these, keep that concept of forgiveness in the forefront of your mind, because that forgiveness mechanic is very critical and important in just expressing love.
Right. So, and that's how we have to live out our faith daily out there. So, what's happening this year, 2025, or at least the next few weeks?
Yeah, I was like, lots of stuff. We have a whole year ahead of us.
Or at
Well,
least
we got a couple of things. This Saturday we have a gospel concert starting at 6:30, and that's here at the church. We also have couples ministry kicking off this Monday at 7 p.m. 6:30 is dinner, right? Potluck dinner. And then on the 18th, Heart to Table has, we're making lasagna. We have all the food, we just need more hands. And that's going to be at our house at 10 a.m. And then the 29th is a Wednesday, that last Wednesday of the month. We're not going to have your traditional Wednesday night. It's going to be a budget meeting that Wednesday.
Yeah, we will not be teaching that Wednesday. That is going to be for serious sit-down business of breaking open books and deciding where things need to go and how they get there.
Got to review what we did last year and plan for what we're going to do this year with ministry. Where it's going to go.
But eventually, we will finish 1 Corinthians.
Right. Which reminds me, are we going to go into 2 Corinthians?
That was the plan.
Okay, then we're going to go into 2 Corinthians.
Yeah. So more business for the Corinthians,
Yay.
except with this one, significant time had passed. So
Yes.
it'll be a different vibe altogether.
It will be a different vibe. All right, so let's open in prayer, and then I'll take it from there.
And then? No, and then. All right. Yeah. All right. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for your word. Lord, I pray that as we study these words, that we allow them into our lives and learn how to practice them in earnestness. I pray that as we study this, it reveals to all of us, to include us on the stage, how to actually show love in the way that you meant it, not the way that the world and not the way that we've understood it for so long from the human perspective, but from the divine, Lord. I pray that you open our eyes, guide our hearts, and bring us to that place where we can see your face, Pame el Pame, and from that we can carry your word and have that light in our hearts so that we could show love to all those whom we come across in our lives and be that representative of you and Christ. I say so in your sweet, precious name I pray. Amen and Maranatha.
Amen. All right, before we actually read the chapter, we got educated this week.
Yes.
And we found out that 13 was actually a hymn,
Well,
or written in a hymn style.
And what's interesting about that is the writing style. So keep in mind, Paul is like this lawyer, Supreme Court, teacher of the law, kind of like very heady individual. And in these, I think it's really from verse 1 through 8, he writes a song. Like everything in there in Greek it has a song quality to it. It has rhythm, it has this parallelism, and it has this beautiful lyrics to it when it's put to music. And the awesome thing about that is because we've seen hymns in Pauline writing in other places, and he didn't write those. Like he borrowed like a hymn from the Second Temple period, or he borrowed a hymn that was already popular amongst Christians. This one was one that he more than likely wrote himself. And it's like, we went through all of this chapter, and we went through all of these things, and he takes these serious points, and then he breaks in the middle for a song.
So we're going to break for a song. Lenny, we have a video there that Damien found for us, and it should be on. All you got to hit is play.
Yeah, this is a lady singing Paul's words, verses 1 through 8, in the original Greek.
Oh, you should just be able to hit it and proclaim. No.
Limbile oamenilor și ale îngerilor, iar dragoste nu a făcut-o mamaramă sunătoare și chimvală răsunător. Și de-aș avea darul prorociei și tainele toate le-aș cunoaște și orice știință și de-aș avea atâta credință încât să mut și munții, iar dragoste nu am, nimic nu sunt. Și de-aș împărți toată avuția mea și de aș da trupul meu ca să fie ars, iar dragoste nu am, nimic nu-mi folosește. Dragostea îndelung rabdă, dragostea este binevoitoare, dragostea nu pismuiește, nu se laudă, nu se trufește, dragostea nu se poartă cu necuvință, nu caută ale sale, nu se aprinde de mânie, nu gândește răul, nu se bucură de nedreptate, ci se bucură de adevăr. Toate le suferă, toate le crede, toate le nădăjduiește, toate le rabdă. Dragostea nu cade niciodată.
Beautiful.
Yeah, see, and it didn't have a lot of like.
How to turn a chilly 50-degree
Let's
room
not turn a
into
chilly
a
into
comfortable
anything.
73 degrees in 90
Oh,
seconds.
That's how
This
he's
jet
looking to
en-
win this year.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, wrong chili. That was for HVAC. You got to Google your own recipe for
Please,
that one,
mister. But
But notice that it was not very much like music in the background. She's kind of singing it a cappella, and she's playing with the ranges a little bit because she's a singer. But the words connect, and they have a rhythm, and they have that lyrical quality. That's why we found that, and just thought that was so neat. Because how often are we reading these things in our language? You never would see that. That is a hymn that's hidden that we would not see because it been translated into English, and once it was translated, it lost all of that.
so, just think if we could, and there are songs out there that had take 13 in English and the same way, but I think this one just speaks even more volumes, because if you would think Paul would have wrote it in the Greek, so she's singing the way Paul would have written it, really.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
And I think even that was Koinonia Greek. It wasn't modern Greek.
No, it had to be Koine, I think. And that the background is, I guarantee that's a Greek Orthodox church.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it totally was. She's a Romanian singer who like studies the history of songs.
Yeah.
She even has some for psalms.
That's ADHD,
Yep.
ladies and gentlemen.
Right.
He hyper-focused on the song, and then he learned everything about it.
Yes, that's my superpower.
That's his superpower. It's a great superpower to have. All right, now let's read the chapter.
I will not be singing this.
Come on now.
Cindy is going to
Hype it
follow
up.
up with a 1 through 8.
All right. If I speak in human or angelic tongues, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so that I can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. And if I give away all my possessions, and if I give over my body in order to boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, love does not envy, it is not boastful, is not arrogant, is not rude, is not self-seeking, is not irritable, and does not keep a record of wrongs. Love finds no joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends, but as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put aside childish things. For now, we see only a reflection as in a mirror, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I will know fully as I am fully known. Now these three remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love.
Definitely not both.
That's not both. But faith, love, and hope. And so Paul starts off at the very beginning here in the first verse. Oh,
We still got more.
no, that's later. That's the verses we're bringing
Oh,
up.
okay, never mind.
That's references.
All right.
Cross references. So what was I saying? Oh yeah, the first verse, right? He starts off talking about the gifts that we just covered in 12, right? And he says, look, they're nothing. They're noisy gongs or clanging cymbals without love.
And remember, there were no chapter breaks. There were no verse numbers in the original letter. It read as one consolidated text. So he's going from gifts. He mentioned love at the very end of 12, and then he is expanding on that. But if we focus on the chapter breaks, because we're coming from a Western mind, we will okay, he's moving on to something else because that's what chapter breaks mean to us. We're moving on to something else. No,
because what he's doing here,
not.
he's contrasting the spiritual gifts to that of such as tongues, prophecy, and knowledge to love with love. He's contrasting it.
He actually shows that they are all lesser, except for the last one of love, because all of them are governed by love and are completely without any power, without any influence, without any merit, except with the engine, the vehicle of love.
Yep, exercised in love, whatever it is.
You know what I think is funny? In chapter 12, when we teach it or we hear it preached, we often point out that the tongues, speaking and interpretation is at the end, like it's the last of the gifts, right? And then in some circles, majority of people want to focus on tongues. Like when we taught about gifts or the Holy Spirit, the first question was, "Are y'all going to teach tongues? Are you going to teach about speaking in tongues?" And I just think it's interesting that in 12 that was at the end, but yet in 13 that's the first thing he says. That
he's the first one he gets.
it's the first line in attack. I just thought it was interesting.
So what this reveals to us is that what Paul is revealing to us here is that spiritual maturity. This is what he's pointing out, because remember, Paul is big on that maturity part. He talks about it in Corinthians. He talks about it in Galatians. He talks about it in Ephesians. I mean, just practically every book that he writes, every letter he writes, he talks about maturing, that spiritual maturity.
And remember, earlier in this letter, he had mentioned, if only there were older men amongst y'all, if only y'all had fathers, because most of these people are very young, either in the faith or just age-wise, or both. And they don't have that kind of wisdom. They don't have very many fathers amongst them. So it's a lot of kids running around and just being immature and causing more division and destruction in the name of Christ than they did before whenever they were pagans at this point.
And they're putting the maturity, they're putting that spiritual maturity on things that are defining that maturity, such as the possession of those gifts. They're saying, if you're not mature, if you don't speak in tongues, you're not mature if you don't prophesy, you're not mature, is what in essence what they're saying. And that's not what Paul is saying here. Paul is saying, look, you don't have spiritual maturity if you don't have love. Yeah. That's where the maturity comes from, is the love. And the love is the supreme virtue because it reflects God's nature. And that's 1 John 4:8. It says, the one who does not love does not know God, because God is love, right? That's Paul hollering at his boy John, right? You know, which they argue.
Hey,
a lot,
remember,
right?
they don't agree.
They don't agree.
They
right?
don't agree.
But they agree
then
on it.
Every time we do this study, we find that they always agree. I don't know why. We're not that smart. So I don't understand.
And ultimately, they measure of that Christian character, right? So love is the measure of that Christian character, that maturity. The gifts of the Spirit are tools, but they must be exercised with right motive. That's the key. What's the motive? Is it selfless, Christ-like love? That's drive it. So that's what he's hitting back on right here at the very beginning, is jumping in with spiritual maturity. Because most of us want to say, sometimes you can go in a church and the most mature person in a church is a child, because they're the one that's going to love like Christ. But everybody else, all the other people around are going to say they're mature because they have this gift or that gift or this gift or that gift.
And remember the disciples, they were so divided over who's going to sit on the right hand and who was going to sit on the left. And he's like, none of those seats are mine to give. Mm-hmm. 2, if you cannot be like this child, you're not going to be in any of these seats, because that was a prerequisite. And it was being able to show that level of love and have that level of faith that you see in children that these adults just couldn't exhibit.
Right. So
these are our saints, by the way.
Exactly. So that love is the defining mark of a Christian conduct. That's the defining mark. So the nature of Christian love is and you see it here in verse 4, it's love is patient, love is kind, it doesn't envy, it does not boast, it is very proud, it's not proud, right? So Paul provides a detailed list of attributes of love, describing its positive qualities: patience, knowledge, our kindness, patience, kindness. And if you remember, what's the fruit of the Spirit? Patience, kindness, right? And that's Galatians 5, right? And the negative aspects, what love is not: envious, boastful, arrogant, right? Which those are things of the world, if you think about it.
Yeah,
right?
And whenever you start looking at what is good and what is bad in the Bible, those are like fundamental cornerstones of actual evil.
Right. And knowing that this love is not merely a sentiment or emotion, but it's demonstrated in the action, shaping how Christians relate to others. It's something that's lived out. It's not just, I love you, man, right? It's not that. There's more to it. It's the fact that who's there to pick you up when you're down? Who's there to pray for you? Who's there to praise you when you're up on the mountain, and not be jealous because you're there?
Who's willing to forgive you? Because it says right there that love does not remember wrongs.
Right.
Who's willing to forgive wrongs? Right. Remember, even earlier in the chapter, he said, if somebody's suing you and ripping you off and they got one on you, oh well, why are you so worried about that? Mm-hmm. He's showing them that level of love, and that's a level of love that is next to impossible to find in the modern Western world. Right. And I don't know if you can find that very often in any other part of the world as well.
Exactly.
Being able to get ripped off and schemed on, being able to get treated wrongly, being lied to, and then still being able to exhibit that love and be able to forgive and be there for that person. That is amazing.
A big part is that restoration part. Because God is a God of restoration. He's restoring us. He's restoring the humankind back into right relationship with Him, right? That's the whole gospel. That's the whole reason Christ came down to be the sacrifice, is to restore our relationship with God, right? So if God and Christ are in the business of restoration, should we not be in the business of restoration? Is that not part of love?
Exactly.
That's that action.
And earlier in this letter, we saw the end run of trying to restore a brother who was engaged in inappropriate sexual relations with his stepmom. You know, that was in there. And Paul is answering their letters saying, yeah, we're just going to let him loose. We're going to cut him loose and let him run. And whenever he, so we're going to give him over to the devil so that he might come back and be restored. And that goes back to Matthew 18.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So love as described here is that agape love. There's 4 types of love in the Greek language, and agape love is really only used in Paul's writing.
Well, actually,
And
yeah,
mostly.
you never see
You don't see it
agape
anywhere.
in any other writings, actually. In any other Greek writings, I think you're actually really hard-pressed to find agape used in any of any of the Greek writings in any shape or
But
form.
we're not Greek scholars, so we don't quote us.
No.
But
But
what we know,
I do
is
know
what-
that most commentators will say that it was very rare, if ever.
Yeah. So, and then the other love that you see is filio, which is brotherly
Brother.
love, and then there was
Eros, where
which
you
is
get
a
erotic.
lustful type love, and then I can't remember what was the last
I
one.
don't remember the other
I
one.
forgot. It's one I don't know, and we had to look it up, and I forgot.
I know it has something to do with familiar love.
Yeah.
Like with your family.
Yeah, I completely
Something
forgot.
like that. We
Anyway,
didn't study.
yeah.
Man,
Yeah, that's all
we
right.
failed.
So, but we're really focusing on this agape
yeah, we're
love.
focused on the one. We studied really, really hard on that one, and we didn't focus on the other ones.
Yeah. So it's that unconditional, selfless, and sacrificial love. And that's the love that you see at Christ, what Christ did for us, right? And God demonstrates that same love because He sent Christ, His Son, down a sacrifice on the cross. So this reinforces the theological understanding that love is not passive but active. There's something that you have to do with it and requires ongoing effort to reflect the love of Christ in our lives and our relationships and everything we do. Love becomes that defining mark of true discipleship, and we see that in John 13, 34 and 35. Let me get it real quick. You got it?
John 13, 34 and 35 says, I give you a new commandment, love one another just as I have loved you. You are also to love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another.
Yeah.
Oh,
How
oh.
you show it.
Yeah, and I will say that there is one thing that really stands out with Christianity in light of the other 2 Abrahamic religions. Keep in mind, there's 3 Abrahamic religions. There's Jewish, there's Muslim, and then there's us. Jews have perfectly no problem with love as long as it's amongst themselves, right? Same thing with Muslims. They love each other, and they show tzedakah and charity and righteousness amongst other Muslims. The quintessential difference between them and us is that we were given the command by Christ Himself to love our enemies. We are not in any position to not love a single person. You have yet to meet a person that God gave you permission to hate if you're an honest Christian.
Right.
Now, if you're a Muslim and if you're a Jew, then you're not under those rules at all, but you're not going in any road that's towards Christ, the cross, and the Olam Haba. You're off reservation.
Right.
You're off reservation completely, because those religions, while they, like especially Judaism, which was really the foundation of our own religion, their problem was what hung Christ on the cross. They did not have that love. They could not exhibit that love because their love always came with serious like obligations and serious qualifications and things like that. Whereas we were put in a position to never have those before us whenever we are engaging with even the world. you know?
This love, it's the basis of Christian ethics, and Paul tells us that over in Romans chapter 12 and verse 9, and it also talks about loving your brother, your enemy too. He says, "Let love be without hypocrisy. Detest evil, cling to what is good, love one another deeply as brothers and sisters. Take the lead in honoring one another." And then if you jump down a little further, down to 13 and 14, it says, "Share with the saints in their need, pursue hospitality. Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse."
And that's why you see, like, there was a huge movement in the 17th to 19th century, even up to the 20th century, of Christian pacifism. And they was seriously just like, they wouldn't even protect themselves. Like the whole Quaker movement, that came from that idea of that love, because these people were the ones that stood against slavery in the 1700s and said, this isn't right. And why would they say that in the 1700s whenever it was completely popular? Because of love.
Right.
You know, they could not justify owning another human being and treating them as property because they read this and understood it.
And you go down further in 12, it says, "Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Give careful thought to what is honorable in everyone's eyes. If possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." And look at here. There's Paul saying again, if possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Meaning, if you can't get along with them, don't be around them. That's your barriers. Right?
Sometimes getting away is showing love.
Right. Just like Paul said over here in Corinthians, he said, turn them over to the world, right? The man in sin with his stepmother. Turn them over to the world. Because when you do that, you don't falter as a child of God. You don't show the negative aspects of being human, right?
You pretty much just let them go where they're already going.
Right, exactly.
Like, let them do what they're going to do. And when they've hit rock bottom, you will welcome them back in.
And then here's how you can deal with letting them go, especially if they wronged you really well. And Paul goes on and says, "Friends, do not avenge yourselves. Instead, leave room for God's wrath, because it is written," and it's over in the Old Testament,
That goes all the way back
"Vengeance
to
belongs to me, I will repay, saith the Lord." Right? "But if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give them something to drink. For in so doing, you will be reaping fiery coals on his head."
And
I think
keep
that's
in,
out to Psalms, if
and
I'm
keep
not
in
mistaken.
mind, man,
Our Proverbs.
sometimes God's vengeance or God's wrath looks like what happened to Nineveh.
Remember Jonah?
Taking enemies that hated God and like sacked temples and killed priests and slaughtered and just blasphemed the God, and then him sending a very reluctant prophet, but sending his love and breaking their hearts. And even Christ said, in the day of judgment, Nineveh will stand and condemn the generation that hung him on the cross.
Yeah.
Like that generation that Jonah went to, they were standing in paradise because God gave them that love, and that was God's vengeance upon them, taking enemies and making them into his allies. Is, I think, one of God's forms of divine vengeance.
Absolutely.
Like, he does not see vengeance the way we do. It's like, make them suffer and make them burn. It's like, nah, make them friends and make them be the people that are going to stand and rebuke the ones that are supposed to be doing the right thing.
Because he's in the business of restoration.
Exactly.
He gives every opportunity to be restored.
And that,
if you look at the Old Testament, the whole theme of the Old Testament is you're screwing up. Here's an opportunity to fix it, but they don't fix it.
and nothing breaks my heart more whenever I was in school and you would get these groups and they would talk and they would say, yeah, you can't find love in the Old Testament. It's like, have you read it? Just curious, have you read it?
Yeah.
And these are people that are going to be pastors. These are people that have graduated and became pastors. And they're like, yeah, I never see any love in the Old Testament. Say, I think you're going to have to read it there, Haas, because
Right.
you're clearly missing a
Right.
lot.
Yeah,
Like the whole book of Jonah is all about love.
Yeah. Well, you're missing the whole eternal nature of love because it's at the very beginning.
Absolutely.
Right. It's the nature of love is there. So you see that love and how eternal it is and that eternal nature. So it says in verses 8, love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be still. Where there's knowledge, it will pass away. So Paul contrasts the eternity of love with the temporary nature of spiritual gifts.
Yeah, actually, it's almost as if all the gifts that are mentioned, they have an expiration date.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
that expiration date is the age to come, the Olam Haba, when Jesus returns and takes over this hot mess and makes it his kingdom that he reigns in forever.
Because we have faith, hope, and love, right? And the greatest of those is love, right? Because when Christ comes, you don't need hope anymore because he's already come, right? And you don't need faith anymore because you see him.
See him right there.
Right there. So the only thing that's going to go for eternity is love. So that's the importance. That's why Paul puts it such importance on the love.
Yeah.
And he says it's the greatest because it's the one that's going to carry here through everything we do here on earth as we live this life, even past. And a prime example is how many people do you know that loved ones that you have loved so much have passed on, but that love is still there for them.
Absolutely.
Right? It's still there for them. They're
It's
still in that
there for
heart.
them, and it's still growing because
Right.
now that you've lost your loved one, you go on and live out that legacy,
Right.
live out that love.
Right.
Lenny did have something.
Hit it.
Sorry, moment kind of passed just a little bit, but had a brief crossover moment with couples ministry. One of the final expressions of love is setting healthy boundaries, and you touched on that briefly, but I forgot the secondary connection. Anyway, but that was the gist I was going to go with, was that your statement about
Setting the
someone at
boundaries.
arm's reach as
Yeah.
an expression of love. It is an expression of love to
Absolutely.
set and maintain.
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. And that and taking into consideration your own limitations and not wanting to be the person to accidentally pour your wrath on
it.
on your
boundaries
loved
for
one.
oneself.
That is a show of love. Like whenever you know that you have X limitation and you're in a situation where that's going to come out and you're going to make a mess on every single person that you love, because being mature, right? Knowing your limitations, setting those boundaries, those are efforts, those are actions, those are being very, very mindful and showing the utmost care for another person to do those things. Those are extreme exercises in love, because if I didn't love you, I wouldn't care how I'm going to act around you, and I wouldn't even care about setting any boundaries. I'm just going to word vomit all over you, and if you cry or you get upset or you get mad, oh, boo-hoo, oh, well, bye. That's not love.
Right. But you're also you're a reflection of God's love, God's character of love, right? And when you do that, that's not what God did. Even in the Old Testament, it's not what God did. If you remember, God just
He
walked.
relented.
Yeah,
often.
yeah. He just basically let them do what they were going to do. It's same thing with us today. There's the perfect will and the permissible will. God might say, hey, don't do that. You might not want to do that, but you got free will. Go for it.
Right.
But you're not walking in his will, and then you suffer the consequences of that. And then many times we want to point the blame back to God. And it wasn't God. God, same thing with the Old Testament. They want to point the blame back at God, but it wasn't God, because those people that brought the people back in right standing with God knew it wasn't God doing it, because God gave them an out every single time.
Yeah. And it's like the parable of the debtor. The king forgave the servant of literally millions of dollars of debt, but the servant couldn't forgive another servant for hundreds of dollars of debt. And it's like, we're so quick to take offense, and we're so quick to get hurt. We're so quick to get extremely loveless and nasty, and God is not. God is not.
Right.
And he's saying that especially in Matthew, by what measure you're able to forgive is what measure you're forgiven. That's why we have to be a people of forgiveness, and forgiveness is an expression of absolute love.
Right? And we got to know that imperfect knowledge of the present, right? And this is what Paul is telling us in the full knowledge of the future. This is what Paul is telling us here in verse 12. He says, "For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known." Right?
And you know for a fact that that term, face to face, in Judaism is one of those, like, you remember Pee Wee's Playhouse, whenever you said the secret word and they screamed? That's a secret word. Whenever you see face to face in the Bible anywhere, that is one of the most important phrases in all of Judaism. Pameh el pameh, to be face to face with God.
Right?
That's a serious, like Jacob wrestling with God. That's a pameh el pameh. He was wrestling, he saw the face of God.
That's understanding our future. That's full knowledge and clarity of the future. Whereas like now, that's why he uses the reflection of the mirror, because James uses the reflection of the mirror as well, right? If you go and look yourself in the mirror, you walk away, you're going to forget what you look like.
Yeah, we
You already
forget what
forgot
kind
what
of
you look
man
like,
we are.
right? You already forgot what you look like. But you have to go back to the mirror and look at yourself again, right? So every time you walk away, think about it. Do you really know what you look like? Because you kind of don't. Right? You see yourself in the mirror, and then you just kind of forget what you look like. Right? But that's what it is. That's in the present right now. That's what we are understanding. We partially understand God right now. We do not know God at his fullest, right? And his ways. And it's like that reflection in the mirror, that dim reflection in the mirror. But in the future, when the Olam Haba, the coming of Christ, right, we will have full knowledge of God. Full knowledge. And we will see him face to face.
Like Adam and Eve.
Right?
Because they're the first people who literally had that pameh el pameh moment, is standing in the presence of God.
And
like there was no barrier between them. There was nothing hidden. They saw God like we see each other.
And he walked with them.
Yeah.
In the midst of the day. Right? So we'll have complete understanding of God. Love, which bridges this age and the next, making it that superior virtue. Right? So love is going to carry us through to the next, right? So love is a motivation behind those spiritual gifts. So we have to understand that if we have a gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and I have a faith that can move mountains but don't have love, I am nothing, right? So Paul emphasizes the spiritual gifts are not ends, they're not ends, but must be exercised with love as their foundation. Right? And I think that's that underlying theme that we've said tonight is love is the foundation. Paul is saying that love is the foundation. Love's the foundation of your Christian walk. It's the foundation of the Christian life, period. Because if you do not have love, you have nothing, right? And Chip Ingram, he's a pastor out in California, Ventura, California. He does a series called R12, Romans 12. That's where I got my whole Romans 12.
That's where
kick.
you got your OCD thing?
It is. So
you put it out there, didn't you?
No. It's where you do that sober self-assessment. But he has another book. I can't remember which one it is. He's quite a few books, and they're really good, really easy to read. So I recommend you do that. Read them if you can. But he does one where he shows, he explains that God equals love. Love equals God. So if you take and you replace love in chapter 13 with God, you're showing the characteristics of God.
Absolutely.
So that's what we have to live up to. That's what we need to live up to.
And that's going back to what we've been talking about, 1 John 4. If anybody, when you have time to read it, it starts at 7 to the end, I believe. But in there he says, the one who does not love does not know God, because God is love.
Right? And Sherry says that love is the first trait of the fruit of the Spirit, and you can have the rest of the traits without it, right? But love it's that foundation of it, because if you don't get that, you don't understand that, everything you do as a Christian is really not Christian.
Yeah. I would challenge anybody to read chapter 13, then go back and read Matthew's Beatitudes. And then just compare the two. Just do a quick cross-reference of the two. That the Beatitudes is what, Matthew 5 all the way through 8 or 7. It's a couple of chapters. And then this one is actually very, very short. And you will see points that are in there. Paul is definitely pulling from the Beatitudes and the writings of Matthew and the writings of Luke and their emphasis on what Christ taught from the Mount. He's pulling that because he's imitating Christ, remember?
Right. So theologically, this teaching highlights that the motivation behind using spiritual gifts is just as important as the gift themselves, right? The Corinthians had been misusing spiritual gifts for their own self-promotion, and we saw that, or to gain status within the church. That causes that distinction, that argument, right? What's the division? There you go. That's the one I'm looking for. Division, which is what God hates. If you go look over in Proverbs, he'll tell you he hates that. There's 7 that he doesn't like.
Proverbs
6 that he doesn't
Proverbs
like. The 7
6.
he hates. The 7th he hates. Abhors.
Abhors. That's a strong one, too.
Very strong.
That's like 5 shades past loathe.
Yep. Loathe. And Paul corrects that by pointing out that without love, the gifts have no spiritual value at all, right? And that reflects the broader theological principle that love fulfills the law. And you see that in Romans 13.
Hey, you got past 12. I'm proud of you.
Yeah.
Look,
See,
he
I
read
told
the
you.
book before, past that one chapter. He's like,
I've read
I
it
think
before.
every time he gets to
Hey.
12, he closes the book and walks away.
I read the before parts too.
I'm proud of you.
But Romans 13:10 says, "Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Love, therefore, is the fulfillment of the law."
And remember who your neighbor is. Anybody who ain't you.
And that's the core to the Christian ethics, right? It says to love thy God with all thy heart, mind, soul, and strength. The second is the first, to love thy neighbor as thyself. And remember, Christ is quoting the Torah, right? Because the first part, love thyself, is the Shema.
That's part of the
what
Shema.
we read every Wednesday. We read Deuteronomy 6, and then the second part is actually pulled out of Leviticus, which is the book of law, right? So he pulls that out, and that's the number one thing: is building relationships with your neighbors, building that whole horizontal and vertical relationships, right? Because we're building a relationship with God through Christ, his son. It's very important to build that relationship, but it's also just as important building a relationship with your neighbors.
And so them two being the highest commandments of God. That's what he's saying. And in following those two, you fulfill the entire law. One is from Deuteronomy, which was for everybody. But Leviticus was laws that were specific and reserved for priests. So whenever you take into consideration that there is an anointing upon believers in the capacity of a priesthood, he's combined those two chapters, one for the everyday man and one for the very anointed priest. And those are the ones that are connecting. Because people in Judaism and in the early Second Temple periods, and probably even in the first Temple periods, and in the Davidic reign, they saw those Levitical laws and they're like, well, those guys over there, the Levites, they got it. We don't have to deal with those. Those are the guys who are going to follow those laws. We got the ones that are over here in Deuteronomy and over here in Numbers. We got those. You take care of the priestly ones. But Jesus is like, no, both has the law, is your responsibility. This is how you fulfill them, just focusing on these two, and you fulfilled all the Torah.
Right, exactly. That's how simple it is.
And both of them are specific to love.
Right. And how hard it is sometimes to love, the simple answer to all of it is to love.
Well, and that's why the Christian walk is by far harder than being a Muslim or being Jewish or being anything, because all the other everything else's, they're only obligated to be nice to each other. They do not have to be nice to any enemies. They do not have to be nice to anyone who disagrees with them. Right. They have the reservation to tell them to kick rocks, and that is the most human thing that you could possibly do. But us being Christians and following God and seeking God's face, we are called to be as unhuman as possible in the capacity that we are told and ordered and commanded to love even those whom are unlovable, who we don't agree with, who we don't get along with, who disagrees with us.
I do love you.
I know, I love you too. This guy and
This
his
guy
jokes.
and his jokes, right? but to close it out here, let's cover some practical applications that we can do today to help it with this, right? So first and foremost, like, you got to make love the foundation of your life and actions, right? So you got to examine your motives in serving others, especially, right? Whether you're involved in teaching, leading, or serving in any capacity, ask yourself if love is the driving force behind your actions. What's driving your actions? And whatever you do, what's driving those actions?
Yeah,
Right?
because if it's I want to get up here so that I can wear a title and be respected, you need to stop.
Yeah, exactly.
Just go,
And that's
sit back down on the pew. That's not the best driver for you.
That's the thing, though, is that love is not self-serving. Love is something you give.
We can go down to the 5 and dime store and get you a self-licking ice cream cone.
Ooh,
Ah!
I've heard about
Pointless,
those.
right? So you gotta refocus on love, right? And when using your gifts to the church or even in your personal relationships, ensure that the love is central to interacting with family, friends, colleagues, and fellow believers.
Yeah.
What is your motive? What is your motive behind your actions, right? And you got to make sure that love is central to that interaction, and actions out of pride, competition, and obligation, they all fall short of being a true Christian and your calling as a Christian, right?
And keep in mind with husbands and wives were just told to be submissive and to listen to their husbands, right? Husbands were given direct orders to love their wives. So if they're loving their wives in the capacity of God, in the scope of what we see in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, you're submitting to somebody who's trying to be as godlike as possible, or you're listening to somebody who's trying to be godlike as possible. And that marriage is supposed to be the image of Christ in the church. You know, that was where people fail in their marriages, by trying to lord over one another or trying to fight over who's wearing pants and whatever other garments and things. And those are all senseless arguments of the very immature. It's whenever you're mature enough to know love and your limitations and set boundaries and all these other things, that is whenever you're literally in that refining fire of love.
Exactly. So you got to cultivate the qualities of love in your daily life, would you say? Right?
I would agree with that.
So you need to practice patience and kindness. Ooh, there's that patience.
And kindness.
And
Which-
marriage
which-
will
yeah,
have you practice that patience.
which both are fruits of the Spirit, right? So you got to practice patience and kindness in your interactions, especially in difficult situations. And that's hard
Why
to
do you look at me whenever you say
Well, you
difficult
gotta make it difficult.
situations?
You're making it difficult now. No, I'm kidding. So the next time you feel frustrated or impatient, you got to pause and respond with grace and kindness, right? So and that's hard to do because we get caught in our emotions. Ooh, trust me, I've been caught in mine. So we got to guard against envy and pride.
Yeah.
So when we see others succeed or excel, we got to celebrate with them rather than allowing that jealousy to take root. That's not hard to do per se in probably maybe church or at home, but that's hard to do at work if you work
Yeah.
in the world. That's hard to do because when you see, we had this conversation, and anybody who served the military understands this point of how someone can be promoted over you when you work with them and you know them and you know what
them.
kind
I
of
know how human you are. Like,
but they got promoted, right? So that's where it comes
Yeah.
into play. So when you're spiritually mature, you can celebrate for them and learn how to let it go, right?
yeah, and whenever I was growing up in the Navy, that was one of my hardest. I think I left the Navy not grown up enough to be able to be happy for some folks that got promoted. And that was as a believer, too. I've grown some then. It's like, hey, you know,
Yeah.
God clearly gave you that thing for a reason. Do well by it.
Yeah,
That's,
so
that's you know.
But learning that is being humble in your accomplishments and give credit to God and others because that's the path that He has you on.
Right,
Because
right.
if He's gonna open a door for you, He'll open that door for you, right? And we got to forgive easy and let go of wrongs, which is hard to do sometimes, right? Especially depending on the level of wrong that you've been wronged, right? Holding grudges or keeping records of wrongs is contrary to the nature of love. Because
And-
why? Love doesn't remember it.
And how many families are seriously torn over? Now, I'm speaking for myself growing up. My family, the folks that I was raised by, they were historians. And no matter what you did or how much you grew, they were going to keep you right where they assessed you a long time ago. And you would never be able to outlive those shadows. But they were always eager to tell you, hey, I love you. And it was so superficial.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't honestly feel love until I got with her family, and I saw that in her family. Her family were able to get really upset over a thing, but then after the thing and after the yelling and after the, you know,
They went home.
brought the
I'm going home.
bringing the point across, we were back at the table, coking and joking and grilling and having fun and being family again. And that was something that blew my mind because in my house, that never happened, ever.
So
You know?
we
have to practice forgiveness and seek reconciliation when relationships are strained. You got to figure out how can you reconcile those.
Well, and going to using the example of my parents were not big on I love yous. They wouldn't tell you I love you. Very rare. They're going to show you they love you. They're going to help you. They're going to give you second and third chances. They're going to correct you when you're wrong. You know, so it was again going back to that example of love is something that you give.
Yep. It's an action. There's something that's there, right? And it endures through those trials and hardships. So we got to persevere in love even when it's hard, right? In difficult or strained relationships, continue to show love, patience, and grace. Don't give up on people easily, right? And when do you give up on someone? When do you turn them over to the world? I can't give you an answer to that. I think that's an answer that you find with God.
And in all honesty, if you truly seek the face of God and you know God's heart, even whenever you cut them loose into the world, whenever you deliver them to the devil so that the devil can refine their flesh, can you honestly say that God said, "Hey, forget about them"?
Right.
Because He didn't forget. In the parable of the prodigal son, the youngest one was let loose to run the full length of his rope. And when he came back, his dad was not there. Oh, who are you again? Oh, the guy who was so anxious to leave. He did not do that to his kid. He still had an eye out for him. He still had that prayer and hope. He still was there watching and waiting for this guy to return. He never forgot him because he never lost that love. He had that love even then. Even when he was turned away, even whenever he walked away and left, he never stopped having that love.
Yeah, that's why we have to choose to believe the best in others, right? And that's hard to do. We got to trust that God can work in their lives. We have to maintain hope in relationships even when reconciliation or change seems distant. Hold on to that hope, right? Hold on to that hope because love will persevere. It'll push through, right? When you show that love and you show the love of Christ, it will push through. And you got to protect and care for others. So love is protective, which means being there for those vulnerable or in need, whether emotionally or physically.
And notice there's a lot of emphasis on the widow and the orphan. And in this world, and in the world of Paul and Timothy and John and Jesus, those were the most in danger. Those were the people who were starving. Those were the people that were being abused in every spectrum of abuse that you could possibly imagine, and few that you've never even thought of. These people were treated absolutely horrifying in their world. And the Christian walk is like, those people are vulnerable. Those people you need to take care of.
To tie it up, though, we got to practice selflessness and humility in relationships. So we got to let go of self-interest. It's not about me. It's not about me at all. It's about God, right? And our relationships, we got to focus on the needs of others. Practice serving others without expecting anything in return. It's selfless, right? And you got to be quick to forgive. Can't keep no record again of wrongs. We got to let go of those past hurts, and we got to holding on to those grudges or offenses. It keeps us from loving Christ and loving others, right? So we got to let those go. And then we got to control our anger. when conflict arises, approach them with patience and love rather than frustration and anger.
That's a hard one.
That's very hard.
When we were going through this, the one that was like, oh, love is not irritable.
I can be irritated, that's for sure.
I
It
can
might not be irritable, but it irritates. It irritates. So love is, if you haven't got the importance of love by reading chapter 13, then you really need to go back and study 13 again, because Paul really emphasizes that love is above all the most important thing of your walk. Period.
And like I said, look at that and the Beatitudes. There is way too many points of contact. There is way too much similarities there that you cannot separate this one chapter and that section of the gospel.
So next week we're going to hit chapter 14. Whoa, hey,
Oh, really?
14,
Because
almost
it
13,
precedes
right?
13?
Yeah, exactly.
Now you're getting wild.
So we continued that discussion of spiritual gifts, focusing on gifts of prophecy and speaking in tongues. So our key themes will be the superiority of prophecy over tongues in public worship, the importance of clarity and order in worship, which is truly important, and Paul points that out. The role of tongues in private and public settings. So we're going to talk a little bit more tongues. The need for interpretation of tongues, and the priority of building up the church.
And in all honesty, this is why we didn't really teach on it in the previous chapter whenever it just kind of touched on it.
14 teaches